welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Piper, for that exhaustive list. As a way of update, I recently accepted a position as the executive director for the Hackett Center for Mental Health. As you guys have probably seen, mental health, we are in crisis at the moment. And so it's something that I felt was really important to do. I'm still a non-resident fellow at the Baker Institute, though, and maintain my relationships there. So I'm going to jump right in because we have a lot to talk about today, and I want to give you lots of opportunities to engage and interact with what I'm going to present to you today. I will like to say that I don't love to hear the sound of my own voice. So at any time, I know that you had instructions for the chat, but this is a very small group with about 30 people. And so, as I get through the slides quickly, if there's things that you have questions about or things that you want to comment on, then please feel free to jump in. Is that okay, Piper, if people unmute themselves and jump in?
Yes, of course.
Okay. And if you want to make it more orderly, if you want to raise your hand using the little chat function, then I can also call on you. But I want you to sort of be active participants. So we're going to really talk about early childhood and as it relates to poverty. And if I can get my thing. So the reason why we care about poverty, particularly in early childhood or in the young years, is because it really does limit one's potential for opportunity. And as a child, these limiting factors are often beyond those that you can control. So, many of us, unless you were adopted, we didn't get to choose our parents. And even if you were adopted, maybe you didn't choose them either. We didn't get to choose what race we were born. We didn't get to choose our gender or the city or country that we were born into. So for children, they just showed up. They didn't really get a lot of choice in that. And their lived circumstance or the circumstances in which they were born into really shapes opportunity. And then effort relates to choices that are within their control, right? And so you always hear about the amazing stories of people who come from or have limited opportunities in childhood, and they, find opportunities and they are able to become successful. So economic mobility really relates to those two things, right? The opportunity and then the amount of effort. But there's these other factors that influence both opportunity and effort. We already talked about race and ethnicity. We know that, based on, policies and systems and structures that were put in place throughout the history of our country, that often there's still remnants or there's still lasting effects of those things that have disproportionately, impacted race, people of racial and ethnic backgrounds. We know that family wealth really does make a difference. So access to a good education, access to healthcare, all those things, we have decades of research showing that it better positions you for economic mobility, or if you're already, fairly wealthy, economic sustainability. Family structure. So children who are in single family homes have less opportunities for mobility than two-parent homes. That's likely correlated to the fact that two parents make more money together, if it's a two-income household. And then we have concentrated neighborhood poverty. So if you are a kid and you live in a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of resources, then that is going to limit your resource and opportunity. So we like to talk a lot about economic mobility. That's one of the things that as a country we're very proud of. And so here are some statistics. If you were born in the lowest fifth of income distribution, your chance for economic mobility is only 7.5% here in the United States. Now, if you compare this to other similarly situated industrialized countries, you can see that despite sort of our viewpoint that our country really has lots of opportunities for economic mobility, you'll see that in contrast to some other countries, we have less economic mobility opportunities than other industrialized countries. So this idea of opportunity and effort is linked to early childhood experiences. We know that if children do not get the type of relational health, meaning interactions with caregivers, caregivers, meaning parents, grandparents, family members, as well as childcare workers, and then stimulating, engaging opportunities for brain stimulation, we know that that perpetuates this cycle of generational poverty. We also know that often opportunities relate to our qualifications, and that qualifications are driven by our educational system. So often, if you take me as an example, I have lots of education. I've also had lots of opportunities that wouldn't have come to me had I not had so much education. And so those things are related, but if children aren't getting the necessary stimulation they need in those first couple of years of life, it's often difficult for them to perform well in our education system. And then the capacity to obtain and keep employment is also related to early childhood experiences, because these first couple of years of life really determine the architecture of our brain, which is really important for being able to maintain relationships and have self-control. And so we realize that children, though, live in family units. And so we need a two-generational approach if we're going to be effective in ameliorating poverty. So I alluded to some of this, but why is this such a critical period of time? Well, brains are built during those first couple of years of life. So Harvard is now estimating that neuronal connections, which are basically kind of the intersection or the things that make up the brain, are formed at 1 million new neuronal connections per second. So if any of you have grandchildren, or if you remember when your children were very little, they were like sponges. And often as adults, we forget how nimble and plastic the brain is to learn new information. So we're surprised that these young children learn so quickly, but it's because their brain is forming these new connections, 1 million per second. What that also means, though, is that the brain is more susceptible to damage during this period of time. So things that happen to children, like adverse childhood experiences, which could include the death of a family member. So think about how many children have been adversely affected during COVID and who have lost parents. Those sorts of things change the architecture of the brain literally, and can influence that child's ability as they grow into teenagers and then adults to be able to regulate their emotions, to be able to have cognitive function, to have language function. All of these things are critical. And so how our brains develop is really a combination of genes and then the environment of those around us, the quality and nature of those interactions. Why do we care about how the brain develops? Well, the brain is literally responsible for everything. And so when we think about, the ability for you to listen to me right now, even though our ears are important in transmitting sound, it's really the brain that interprets the words that I'm saying for language and reading and vision. All of these things, coordination, touch, taste, smell, concentration, planning, problem solving. Every single thing that we do as human beings, the brain is responsible for. And either you could say it's really amazing that the foundation, the architecture for all of these critical functions as a human is pretty much set by age 4. By age 4, 80% of the brain is already formed. And then we have the rest of our lifetime to develop and form the rest of the brain. So here's a model from Harvard, kind of really just emphasizing. So if you look at, this is a graph showing the rate of neural connections. And remember, neural connections are the thing that makes up the brain. And you could see here that even in the first year of life, the rate of formation of new neuronal connections is exponential. And then as you could see over the life course, even after that first year, the rate of new neuronal connections significantly declines. So again, really enforcing how important it is for us to ensure that children have proper brain development in those first couple of years of life. Here's an example of a child, some of the children from a Russian orphanage. So this was at the very beginning in the 70s when scientists start really recognizing that, children who had mental deficits and had other learning challenges, that, to really think that these things originate in the brain. And so here's a CT scan, and you have a normal 3-year-old and you have a child of extreme neglect. Now, neglect is that this child was not, necessarily beaten or abused in the traditional sense, but it did not get those critical interactions with a loving, caring adult. And so the brain is a use it or lose it organ. If you don't use parts of the brain, you will lose them. And so here you could see that, the executive function that for the most part, every, aspect of that brain now is much smaller. And so this child will have difficulties for the rest of their life. So implications of suboptimal brain development are lower IQ and impaired learning, decreased vocabulary, impaired mental and emotional health, cognitive delays, difficulty with self-control, and then difficulty maintaining, relationships. And so if you think back again, as it relates to poverty, all of these things are really important in order to be functioning adults and to be able to have a career. And then these things lead, into adulthood. So we have high unemployment rates, decreased educational attainment, incarceration, behavioral problems, mental and physical health problems, and then single parent households, because remember, when children have suboptimal brain development, they develop into adults who have difficulty maintaining relationships. So here are all the ways. You're probably wondering now, okay, well, what do we do? How do we ensure what's necessary for optimal brain development? So it starts in the prenatal period of time. So prenatal nutrition is critical, and then reducing maternal stress and depression, because cortisol actually inhibits brain development and growth. And so ensuring that mothers have the support they need during pregnancy and of course after is really critical. And then social. So the parent-child relationship is probably the most critical pathway for ensuring optimal development. So, these are likely the children that grew up into adults who you heard about the success story, and they talk about that grandmother or that mother or someone in their life who made such a significant impact on them. Well, as human beings, we need each other. We're social creatures. And so the brain really requires this interaction. Harvard calls it serve and return. If you think about a tennis match where a baby coos or makes a sound or smiles, and the adult responds in an appropriate way, because the brain is making those serves in order to figure out the world, in order to figure out if this is a trusted adult. When babies cry, they're again trying to say that they're using their language to say, I have a need that needs to be met. And so all of these things are really critical. And so we have that parent-child relationship. Again, maternal stress and depression really influences that. So if mom is depressed, she's not going to be able to engage with her baby when the baby responds or tries to get her attention. Different parenting styles. So, parenting styles being more nurturing, warm, boundary setting is very different than parenting styles, which are very harsh and perhaps exaggerated. And then we have adverse childhood experiences. Then there's also environmental factors. So if you remember the tragedy in Flint, Michigan, where there was lead in the water, well, lead actually literally deposits in the brain. It crosses the brain-blood barrier and makes literal deposits there. And so that can influence IQ. Crowding, housing, chaos, Scientists think that it has to do with the fact that when a child's home is very chaotic and there's lots of people there, that it's possible that child is more likely to be ignored or more likely to not have its served as easily responded to because there's so much chaos for the adults. And then again, nutrition, because the brain really needs these building blocks in order to make these neuronal connections. I created this model, and it's very simple, but as I've gone to DC and to the state level, talking to policymakers about this issue, some of these things seem abstract or seem like they're outside of your control, or maybe, in the privacy of kind of the parent and the child. And so really, what's the role of policymakers? What's the role of philanthropy? What's the role of community in trying to support early childhood development? Because as I showed you, it affects all of us. So incarceration rates and crime and single parenthood and mental health and physical health with the cost of healthcare, all of these things affect all of us. Yet, when we think about, the time period when we have this critical time, they're often not in traditional systems like schools. And so this model shows that the parent-child relationship is actually the most important aspect of this that could influence early childhood brain development. But then you have these societal factors that influence that relationship, either positively or negatively. So if a parent is depressed or doesn't have social support or is living in poverty and constantly worried about not having enough food or being evicted from their home, that parent isn't going to have the same capacity to really be patient and engage with their child in the way that we know is really important. Not because the parent doesn't want to, but because there's like barriers to that. There's mental barriers with that parent's own mental health, as well as stress. And then children, if they're not getting enough nutrition or they've had trauma, either inside or outside the home, it's very difficult for them to attach to that parent. And so they may not be even giving lots of serves for the parent to even return. But if you look at the top, we have these positive things where if we had safe environments, if we had adequate healthcare and nutrition for moms, particularly those at risk, if we could create in our society an environment that helps to support early brain development, then some of these obstacles could be overcome. And so our goal as a society should be that every child has access to a safe, stimulating environment. And so remember when I said 2-generation approaches are really critical. Why is that? Because children live in parents, and you saw that dynamic there between the parent and the child. So if you only do interventions that are for the child has to still interact with their caregiver or their parent. So housing security, economic security, there's been some research now on Biden's child tax credit that went to families in advance. So they have shown significant returns on that in the early childhood field, and then in reducing maternal stress and depression. So we know that sometimes money is the answer, right? That families just need to be able to pay their bills, buy food, have security, quality childcare from birth to school age. So, often, quality childcare, there's a shortage and it's very expensive. And even when there are quality childcare providers that accept low income parents, there's so few of them that there's very long waiting lists. And then parenting programs that create a culture around positive discipline, on engaging with their child, with using lots of language and reading, that all of those things are really important, that if we are going to have the next generation of children be able to be productive members of society, then we really need to be able to think about this broadly as society.
That's me at 4 months old. I'm one of the thousands of little miracles born into poverty every day. That's my mom. She's 17 and never finished high school. She's got some big dreams for me, but she's alone and she's scared. This is my first birthday. That's my grandma, my cousin Tanya, and her boyfriend Kevin. We all live together. It's cold and crowded. I hope we move soon. I don't like Kevin. He's always yelling. This is my second birthday. We're all at daycare, strapped in watching TV again. I wish I could just run around. This is my third birthday. My brother William's taking care of me while my mom sleeps. She works the night shift, so we can't turn up the TV, but we get to go to bed whenever we want. This is my fourth birthday. We're sleeping at my aunt's this month. I don't know when my dad's coming home, but I'm hungry and I miss him. This is my fifth birthday. This is my first day of kindergarten. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm unprepared because I didn't get the right start. I'm twice as likely to be in special education. 30% more likely to never go to college. 70% more likely to be arrested for a violent crime. Become a teen parent. Drop out of school. Never hold a job. Spend the rest of my life in poverty. My mom plays with me all the time. She smiles a lot now, and she knows she's not alone anymore. Grandma, Tanya, and Kevin read me a story every night before I go to bed. I go to my school every day, where I get to run and play and see all my new friends. Will and I go to preschool together. Today we learned about dinosaurs and played a counting game. Every morning, my dad and I brush our teeth and do breakfast together. We have our own place now, and I know we'll always be together. This is my first day of kindergarten. I'm rested, I'm eager, I'm confident, I'm curious, I'm prepared. I'm ready. I am your future. Change the first 5 years, and you change everything. Anyone interested in investing?
So, that's one of my favorite videos because I think it really captures everything that I shared with you at the beginning, how the first few years are critical, but also if you notice the crowding, children, especially young children and babies can really pick up when there's tension, when there's stress in the room. That really increases the baby's cortisol level and can hinder brain development. And so often people who are really interested in education focus so much on, kindergarten readiness and all these other things. But the reality is if we don't invest in the supports to support families in ensuring that their children have all the necessary things to ensure adequate brain development, it doesn't really matter all the things that you can do in the education system if children don't have the cognitive, the relational, executive function, the self-control in order to be able to learn in school. So what is Houston doing about this? Well, we have a nonprofit called Good Reason Houston. It was formerly called Early Matters, and that really focuses on pre-K enrollment. And so it focuses primarily on age 4, which is a little late in the game. because remember I said that the most rapid rates of growth, if you remember the chart, actually happens in the first year. And then by age 3, the brain is about 80% developed. And then by 8, it's about 90% developed. We have the Children's Museum. So I've been really impressed with the Children's Museum because they have really gone outside the walls of the museum and really done a lot of work doing community programming and what they call pop-up shops. And those pop-up shops, they deal with what's called the Houston Basics. It's from a program developed at Harvard called the Boston Basics. And this really helps parents, it's videos, and helps parents to understand the types of interactions with their children that support brain development. So the Children's Museum partnered with the City of Houston Public Health Department, and they were prior to COVID doing workshops all over the city to help support families. And then Project Row Houses, which is located in 3rd Ward, has a young mother's residential program. And that really is a holistic program that helps, young mothers have housing needs, counseling on personal growth, parenting skills, and it really allows their children to grow up in a nurturing community within that neighborhood. So here are some examples of kind of citywide initiatives. So the 3 examples that I just provide you, and there are others. So I also have a parenting program, and there's lots of other folks who are in this space, but I just wanted to highlight 3 of them. Now, this is really a citywide. So this was a partnership in a public-private partnership. And basically this helps support because, so I don't know if any of you saw, there was a New York Times article, I don't know, maybe it was like 5 or 6 years ago now, maybe closer to 8, that showed that there was this 30 million word gap between low-income children and middle and high-income children. And so this was to count the words so that moms really got, and families, not just moms, but parents got an idea of really how many words their children are getting. And so it's called a word pedometer, and that was a citywide initiative. We also have the Minnesota model for early childhood development. And this was a market-based parenting approach, which the city gave scholarships to low-income families for their children to apply to quality early childhood centers or childcare centers. And this had phenomenal results. The rate of return on this, I think, was 11%. And all of the kids who were a part of the scholarship program did well. They were ready for kindergarten, as well as their parents were able to go to work. So household income increased, and tracking those children through 3rd grade, which I don't know if you're aware, but they build prisons based on 3rd grade reading levels. So 3rd grade is a critical period of time. And so all of these children were doing amazing. So this program was so successful that the state of Minnesota adopted this. It was piloted in St. Paul, and then the state adopted it. And so the outcomes was the number of high quality providers increased 85% in Minneapolis. So if you remember me saying that even for, childcare quality, even those that accept low income families, that there's so few of them that there's very, very long waiting list. So we have a shortage in Houston in particular for quality childcare providers who accept low-income families. Well, that increased by 85%. Children show significant increases in language, literacy, early math skills, and then over 80% of interviewed parents talk with child's teacher. And so parents became more engaged in the educational system because they had that support. So again, the Minnesota legislature adopted this. They increased funding from $4 million in 2011 to now $60 million back in 2015, and that number has continued to increase. So the principles for bringing any early childhood development initiative to scale are: we have to start early. So The Minnesota model started with age 3 for childcare, and then also, which I didn't include here, had home-based family support for those who were 0 to 3. And we must empower parents. Parents need a lot of support. And so engaging parents and supporting them, if you could saw on that video, that all of the strategies really help support the parents. And then access, assess and improve quality. We need things that are flexible and culturally sensitive. And then frankly, our region needs a long-term commitment. I think there's been several initiatives that have come and gone. I think, if you recall, Lena Hidalgo, when she came to office, said that she was going to prioritize early childhood, and she did a $10 million grant RFP process. But again, it's difficult to really ascertain how many of these things will just be programs or things that come up, but aren't sustainable. All right, so that is the end of my talking, thankfully. And I'd love to hear questions, comments, other thoughts. I tried to scroll through to see if any of you raised your hand or wanted to interject, and I didn't see you, that anyone did. So now is the time to ask your burning questions. Yes, Karen. Karen?
When a child is in a family where several languages are spoken, and I'm thinking 3, does that, I have a friend who wants her children to know English, Spanish, and German. And so they have a routine that they go through so that, and their kids, I think, are 7 and 8, something like that. And sometimes one of them just doesn't talk because he's not sure which language he ought to be speaking. And I'm not saying that's wrong, because kids sometimes get funny ideas, but does it at all enhance the child's ability to keep on learning? And
yeah, honestly, your friend is a smart woman or man,
so.
Because with the brain developing at that fast of a rate, learning multiple languages is much easier for the child, and they could become fluent and very quickly in those languages. What you're noticing as far as the hesitancy in speaking is that there's a part of the brain that then is connected to the motor part of speaking. Mm-hmm. So there's a part of the brain that receives the information for language, multiple languages, right? That center is the same, whether you speak English or German or French or whatever the language is. And but then that part of the brain has to connect with the motor. So that's your mandible and your jaw and how your tongue makes the pronunciations. And so for children who are learning multiple language, it takes them longer for that part of the brain, that motor, to kind of practice. And so it seems like they have a speech delay, but they don't. It's just that the brain is trying to form new circuitry that says and tries to figure out, okay, when you're speaking German, this is how the motor part, the muscles need to move in order to articulate that language. And when I'm speaking Spanish. And so kids who learn one language, again, doesn't matter the language, it's just much faster because the brain connections is a simple pathway between that one language and then using the muscles to articulate that one language. So I even get parents, who are immigrants who, are fearful of teaching their child their home language because they're afraid it's going to delay them in English. But cognitively, the children are actually sharper. I mean, they're getting additional stimulation. It just takes a while for the motor part to catch up. So very, very wise. So I am seeing a bunch of things in the chat and then folks raising their hand. So if Piper, and I don't know who was ordered to go. So Piper, if you could help me or someone could help me figure out the chat, and maybe interrupt me as I'm getting people. So I saw that Patricia had raised her hand. Next I saw. So Patricia, have you still, I don't know if your hand's still raised or not, because I see Cleta now with her hand.
Actually, I pulled it down because you answered the question about.
Okay, perfect. All right, so then Cleta, am I saying your name correctly? Okay, perfect. And then you're on mute, so if you'll just unmute yourself so I can hear you.
Fluent in
Yes.
all the languages, but when they do, they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, first of all, I'd really like to thank you for the presentation. That's my field that I've been in for between 40 and 50 years, actually. And a lot of different aspects of that field. There's a beautiful, brief synthesis. But I just wanted to give one example of, in answer to the concern about that you explained the reason for it. But I was teaching in a toddler program in Wyoming where the parents had met in Wyoming, but one parent spoke Dutch and one parent spoke Russian. And they both spoke English and had conducted their courtship in Wyoming in English. They had a little boy that I was teaching who was not quite 2, and he wasn't saying anything at all. And both parents were concerned. And I said basically what you said, not as eloquently, but I explained the reason that it would come along. It would just be a little slower. The child, by the end of the year, was speaking a little bit of English and a little bit of Russian, not so much Dutch. And then the father got a sabbatical and they went to Germany. And they were in Germany for a semester. And the child came back as a 3-year-old into our program and could speak English, Russian, Dutch, and German.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I wish I had known this when my children were younger. I certainly would have exposed them to a lot, more languages, but unfortunately, they don't actually teach this in medical school. So believe it or not, I mean, there's like now decades of research showing that these early years really do change. I mean, even morbidity and mortality outcomes, but we do not learn this in medical school. So I did not know. All right, Pipe, does someone, there's the chat is on fire. So anyone want to help me with that?
I'll start with Linda's question. Could you speak to the effectiveness and deficiencies of the Head Start program?
Yeah, so the Head Start program actually has, lots of data and research around it and around the impact of it. And actually the woman who used to run the Head Start program, I got to know her pretty well at my time at the Baker Institute. And so it has a lot of evidence base. It has a lot of strengths. I think, some of the challenges are that in many ways, it also kind of curates. I mean, it's the same challenge that sometimes people have with charter schools or with magnet schools, and that, Head Start really does kind of filter for a certain type of parent. Like you have to agree, you have to be part of the, their parenting, and all those reasons are like really important to understand it. But the challenge is that then it doesn't reach the vulnerable of the vulnerable, right? So like, in that video, that mom at the beginning who felt isolated and alone and was barely hanging on, she might not meet all those requirements and be able to go through that process for Head Start. So she, might not have been able to get the benefit. So I think one of the challenges, and with it being more of like according to my colleague, and this was some time ago, but like it used to work where, regions, we would apply for funds and then those funds would come to certain agencies, right, who got it over and over again. And that to kind of break into that also was a challenge, right? So having new people get streams of fund, or having a region getting, more larger allocation for funds based on the need. Head Start doesn't adapt like that. And so like as the Houston population is growing, as you know, maybe the number of infants and toddlers in our region, you know, are growing, Head Start doesn't like give us more money because we have more need, you know, so that's also sort of a challenge. Does that answer your question, Linda? Okay, thank you for asking it.
And Lethe wanted to clarify that the video said 70%, the kids who grow up in poverty have a 70% higher chance of being incarcerated for a violent crime.
That's what it said, yes.
That's very significant. Yeah.
And that's why, you know, again, that's what I'm like, I was not being sort of facetious or being funny when I said that they plan prisons based on third grade reading level. That's a real thing. So it is like, it's a major, major concern. And it goes back to physiology because part of self-control is in the brain. And so if I'm a child who doesn't get spoken to very much or experiences a lot of trauma, then the part of the brain that gets a lot of neural connections, because the brain just forms connections based on the input. So like if I have parents who are yelling at me all the time or whatever, then that limbic emotional part of my brain is going to get more activity. If I have parents who are calm and more logical and sort of talk to me more, that executive function, that language, the brain is a responsive organ. It doesn't know any better. It's trying to figure out the world. And so it constructs itself based on what the world is telling it. When I was in ophthalmology, a really good example of that is that sometimes, you know, children are born and their eyes don't see, the front of their eye is shaped differently. And so their vision is like significantly different in one eye, right? So like they might be 20/20, which is perfect vision in the left eye, and in the right eye, they might be 20/60 or 20/80, meaning it's very, very blurry. Well, initially, the brain tries to reconcile those images. Remember from the picture, vision's in the brain. And so it keeps getting this blurry image. So think about my hand back here, right, which is very blurry. And then my hand here, which is very clearly. It keeps trying to bring these images together. It keeps trying to make them fit one another. But then by age 3, the brain's like, wait, I figured it out. If I just get rid of that image, now I can see this image so much better. And so the brain will literally eliminate the neural pathways from that eye. So the child is legally blind in that left eye because the brain says, this isn't making sense to me. And so that's why if you see kids with patches, the patch is over the good eye, actually, in order to trick the brain into continuing to allow the survival of those neurons from that weak eye. So if you think about a child who's not getting lots of stimulation, lots of interaction, if you think about those children who were in their car seats watching television all day, the part of the brain that's going to be super powerful and strong is going to be the limbic system, which is the most primal part of us, but it's all the emotion, right? They're reacting to the discomfort of being in the chair. They're reacting to whatever they're seeing on TV. It's all emotion. And so as those children get older, they don't know how to use their words. When they're uncomfortable, when something bad happens, all they know how to do is react. And that leads to, you know, behavior that doesn't sort of match our societal expectations, right? And then at some point becomes violent, right? As they get older and as other traumas and other things are related. So it absolutely makes sort of physiologic sense of why that would be true.
And
That was
Nancy,
incredible. Thank you. That was Lisi who asked the question. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Nancy asked, are you aware of the local United Way Bright Beginnings initiative funded by ExxonMobil? It has a 20-year track record of work supporting early childhood daycare centers, and a major part of their work is with the collaboratives for children. U of H has been keeping data and following these children through HISD and Spring Branch ISD.
Yeah, I'm actually an evaluator for Collaborative for Children. So yes. You know, again, I think focusing on childcare quality is really important. I think the question's always what defines quality? And the Texas Rising Star, which is our quality, does not really embody all the things that really relate to what I'm talking about. So what I care about is actually like how the brain is developing is what I care about, because those are the things that translate to sort of all these outcomes. Quality, I think, is, or kind of our standard way of rating quality is one way to move that needle, but it doesn't provide the same levels of support and more comprehensive things, right? Because I can have a child, a quality childcare center, and then that child goes home to some of those examples that you saw in the video. And it's really that attachment to that primary caregiver that is going to drive a lot of that brain's development.
I had questions about that. Do we have programs, or are there things that we can do? And it kind of ties into Julie's question. What can we as older women do to support these families? Are there programs that we can volunteer with? Because it seems like, I know they're talking about universal pre-K, but that's, like you said, that's at age 4. It's too late. We need to help these parents who have a brand new baby and do the things that, all of us who were educated at Rice and, knew that we needed to talk to our babies and read to them and sing with them and all those things. I would love for all of us to be able to help out with.
Yeah, and I don't know that an organization like this exists. If there is, then I haven't heard of it, which would, I guess, not be impossible, but would be unusual. But moms need support. Like if you remember when you guys had your kids, for those of you who are mother, yes, there's nurse family partnership, but that's actually quite different. Like sometimes you just need to shower. Like sometimes sometimes you just need a nap. Like that could make all the difference between me wanting to read to my baby and me being like, I don't have time for this right now. I'm just going to lock you in a room because I'm going to go lay down somewhere, right? Like moms and parents, right? I don't want to just focus on mom, even though most of my work is focused on women. Like we need support. And the problem is that for many, many communities, because people get disconnected from their family. I mean, there really is, right? Like not sort of on some sort of like political or moral thing, but like legitimately there is a shift in family structures. It used to be that for many, particularly in certain cultures, we would have multiple generations. Like my grandparents watched me. They took care of me while my parents worked. More and more there's like a fragmentation of the different generations from one another, and then a lack of sort of that community support. Now, one community that I would say still has lots of community support is like Third Ward. I do a lot of work in Third Ward, and they are neighbors help neighbor. We actually did a massive survey, and like people are willing to watch each other's kids and help each other out. And they're like, they have the Young Mothers program. So there, I feel like they've built the community support for families and for children in that community, but that's like the exception. It's certainly not the rule. And we're currently working with the Brookings Institute on what's being called deaths of despair. Have you all heard about that work? That even for Caucasians, lower income and middle class they're hopeless. They're killing themselves, right? I mean, all over the country. And we're seeing the suicide rates. Like more and more, the pandemic has made families isolated. So if there was a way that you women could come together and form a coalition or a group that said, hey, you know what? We'll mentor young moms. I mean, gosh, how amazing, what a gift that would be to have someone. I had my mom to come and like help me with breastfeeding and like say that, but many of these families now, they don't have good relationships with their parents anymore, right? They don't have the family support that many of us for generations have relied on. And the pandemic has created increasing social isolation, increasing hopelessness. I wrote an issue brief that if you're interested at the beginning of the pandemic, saying that we are going to see the impact of this on this generation, 10 years from now. Like the kids who were babies, they're going to be going into 4th and 5th grade. They're going to be the group that we get, we built more prisons for, because we didn't, like our country was not set up to really say like, we're going to support families and isolate. Like we don't have that. And the example I use, or sort of why I suspect that, is a study that was taken out of Canada, where it was Caucasians, it was middle income mothers who they were in an ice storm, and it was 45 days. They were shut in, they were isolated, they didn't have electricity, food was difficult to get to. So they got a snapshot of what it would be like to be in poverty and to be disconnected from people and not have family and friends. And, it affected the economy. People lost their jobs. I mean, it was a major thing. And they studied those children till they were 13. And for kindergarten, they performed less. So they had cognitive delays, they had emotional delays. And this happened to them when they were in utero. So that maternal stress, even in utero, impacted. So when the babies were born, they weren't born in the ice storm. The ice storm was sometime when they were in utero, but yet it still functioned, it still affected their brain development. And even following 13, they had a higher, rates of diabetes and other things that are related to cortisol and endocrine function. So guys, this is really serious. Like we, I'm concerned about what's going to happen, what our country is going to look like in 10 years. So things that you all can do is really trying to find, if there's women in your community, if there's something that you all want to start, you want to partner with a nonprofit that, serves, women, but to say, hey, we'll watch your baby for an hour. Hey, we will mentor you, or hey, we will support you. Nurse family partnership is challenging because the people drop out of nurse family partnership. And, I think for low income families that already feel like, child protective services and all that, it's much more difficult because they come to your house. So like it's shown some effectiveness, but when you look really close at the data, you find that like over half of the people drop out of the program. So I want to make sure, Joyce has had her hand up for a while, and I know we're coming to an end. So I want to make sure I address her question. Joyce?
Sorry, I was just taking time to come off of mute. Thank you so much for accommodating my question. I agree with everything that you've said, and I, was going to proffer an example of community support from an example from the African community. For instance, in my particular dialectical group, which is the Igbo, when the women when women are pregnant and are close to birth, their mothers, it's like a requirement, or at least some female relative is required to go and stay with her. Not necessarily serve as the midwife, but, be there to do supportive things like you've mentioned, how to nurse the baby, how to bathe the baby, and also to give the mom a shower break, basically, and so forth. And it is unfortunate that our pandemic, there was the pandemic didn't necessarily initiate the disconnect that we have societally right now. It was in existence before, but it has exacerbated it. I know that there were times when, volunteers would go into hospitals and rock babies or nurse them and all of that. And also for the geriatric demographics, young kids would go in and volunteer to, help the elderly, read to them, or brush their hair, wash their hair, do little things like that. So it was reciprocative, where the that generation learned from the elderly, and the elderly got services from them. But now with the pandemic and the health barriers, it's not so easy to do that now, unless everything is done virtually. But yeah, I do agree with you that there is going to be a future repercussion to, and everybody else knows this too, that there will be a future repercussion to all of this. We just don't know to what degree and what it is. And the last thing I wanted to say or to ask is if you can share that study from Canada. I think I sent it to the wrong person. I sent it to.
Actually, if you go to the Baker Institute website, you'll see at the beginning of the pandemic, we published a paper called like America's Future, America's Children. And so I described the study in detail and cited there.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so we have 4 minutes left. Are there any burning last questions or comments?
So Patricia had asked if you would be willing to share the presentation, and she said that, you know, she would use it respectfully with the appropriate recognition of where it came from if you were interested in allowing us to share that with others.
All right. I generally don't like to share my slides to be distributed without the context, because in doing my work around, you know, equity and some of the other work, you know, data can be shaped or used to tell whatever narrative. And not saying at all that whoever asked for the slides that you would do that, but I find that slides without context can be pretty dangerous. So I don't share slides for the purpose of, to redistribute.
Well, what we can do is ask Linda to send out a link to your Baker Institute piece, and then people can look at that and, you know, find ways to find information through that. Absolutely. And I wanted to recognize that Sylvia commented that she does volunteer reading mentoring, and she sees that at 4th grade, the education system changes from learning to read to reading to learn. And she saw that as connecting with your comment about 3rd grade reading level and the estimating of future outcomes. So I know that Texas legislature does not take the federal funding for Medicaid, but it's my understanding that for young children that they are covered, and but there's a gap of people who don't get covered. Can you talk any about that and how that affects the groups you're studying?
Yeah, so I'm certainly not a health insurance expert, so let me qualify with that. But they did try to close the gap in this last legislative session by covering moms and their babies 6 months. So what happens is when you are pregnant and you are low income, you qualify for Medicaid. But then once you have that baby, then you lose your coverage, and the baby is supposed to then be enrolled in CHIP, which is a children's health insurance plan. But again, if you remember when you had a baby, you're not thinking about, oh, I now have to get my kid off this insurance and move them to that insurance. You're thinking like, I'm tired, I just put this baby to sleep, I'm just trying to figure this out. And so many children weren't getting their postnatal checkups and other like really important checkups in that first 6 months because of the administrative burden and the gap and all that stuff. So advocates for children and women and children proposed for the Texas legislature to give a year so that moms and babies are covered through Medicaid for a year. And they didn't do that, but they did do as a compromise 6 months. So now they have 6 months to get their kid CHIP, get them, enrolled. And then now there's a separate Medicaid plan for women postpartum that then they can roll on. So to be honest, you have to be pretty sophisticated to navigate all these different health insurance plans, honestly.
And that might be a role for us, that we could help people understand what the, Dr. Moore, we thank you so much. And we want you to stick around because we're going to take this picture. And Piper, thank you for bringing Dr. Moore to us. This has been wonderful. Okay, everybody, turn on your camera. We don't want just a picture of your name. We want your face. Are we ready, Amanda?
I'm ready. I see some more cameras are turning on, so I'm gonna give it just 1 second. And I'll count it down. So in 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. I'll take one more. 1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who came today. A special thanks to Dr. Moore. I can't say your first name. Say it for me.
It's Quianta.
Quianta, because most of us around in this group are first name basis. Quianta.
Yeah.
And congratulations on your new appointment.
Thank you.
But I hope we see you again and hear about you and your good work.
Thank you. So much.
Thanks everybody who came. Thank you. Piper has been a miracle girl for a few months here, and we appreciate her. And thanks to all of you who come to the SRUW lectures and support SRUW. Let's give ourselves a hand. See you next week. Now we've got virtual. Oh, that's something. Oh, I'm running out of all time. I want to remind you, we're going to have an author on February 21st at 7 in the evening, Robert Cargill, on the Great Texas Oil Heist. And that's important. And then we'll see you next week for our regular lecture series at 12 noon on Monday. And I'll see you then.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Anyone who is inspired to help young mothers, I'd be happy to look into starting an initiative in that. So feel free to send me an email. I'm pipermadland@gmail.com. So it's pretty easy to get an email to me, and I'm going to start looking into this.
Piper, my church at one point had a thing for teen mothers that went to Lee, whose name is now Wisdom High School, and they got them there because I forget what they called it, but whatever it was, they didn't recognize the name, but they knew it meant food. And I heard one of them speak because she said, "Why do these rich ladies want to help us?" But it turned out, that they served as mentors. And I have no idea if they still do that. And, because of the COVID, they probably don't. But I could try to find out if they still do it.
Okay, that'd be great. I'm going to start looking into it. And Electra suggested Small Steps, which is an organization that St. John's sends volunteers to. And I don't know how young they start, but I think there's probably I'm sure more need than, we can reach right away, but I'd be thrilled to hear about any programs that already exist so that I can, either plug in there or see if there's a need.
Well, all the years that I taught high school, I used to say that what they needed to do was, take any kid that couldn't read in 3rd grade and have a tutor, could be a volunteer, have a tutor for that kid in 3rd grade and make sure that kid learned to read in 3rd grade. And I never taught elementary school. I only started with 7th grade, but I could recognize from my years of experience of teaching the upper grades that was the crucial point. And, we need to start way before then.
I was going to say, yeah, we need to catch them before they make it to 3rd grade. so that they're already reading by 3rd grade. And I mean, I know just from my experience as a parent reading those books about the number of words a kid knows by age, by the time they get to kindergarten, is an excellent determination of how well they'll do in life, you know. So we have to get started when they're little. And as that, I thought that video was a really excellent
Oh, it was.
depiction of. I can't imagine having to send your child someplace where they were basically strapped in all day because there were more kids than adults could handle, you know. I mean, that's
When
just,
I was getting ready to go back to work after Lucy was born, and I went to find a place for her to stay, I went to a church, and all these babies were lying in cribs with bottles strapped to them. And I went, what? I am not sending my child to lie down in a crib with a bottle strapped to her. No, you are a church and this is how you treat infants. It boggled my mind. I had no idea that this was a possibility. I mean, this was a church in Bel Air. I mean, no, we're not doing this, folks. And, you know, I found someplace else, but
I'm getting signals that we gotta go.
okay.
well, actually,
Just one last comment. If you're interested in tutoring and reading, check out, it's a national organization, Reading Partners. They tutor
Okay.
kindergarten through 3rd or 4th grade.
Yeah.
and
They provide the curriculum. They're great.
Say the name again.
Reading Partners.
Okay. All right. That's a good one to end on, and I'll see you next week.
thanks everybody.
Everybody.
Bye.